Hello, welcome to the Rooms with Ronald podcast, brought to you by the Multifamily Media Network. I'm your host, Ronald Harrington. In 2023, I set an intention to shop 100 apartment communities to see how leasing was evolving around the country. Rooms with Ronald was born out of that experience. In this series, I share my experiences and engage in meaningful conversations with other professionals in the industry as we discuss all things related to leasing and marketing. Join in as we expand the Rooms with Ronald experiment. Happy January, everyone, and welcome back to another exciting year of Rooms with Ronald. I'm your host, Ronald Harrington. And if you're just tuning in, where have you been? This is 2025. No, I'm just kidding. This is a podcast on all things leasing and marketing. Kind of came about shopping properties over the course of a year. I shopped over 100 properties, and now I get to talk to other people about leasing. And today I am joined by rising star Kyle Hillebrand, who is a national roving leasing consultant for Monarch Investment and Management Group. Kyle, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and no one knows this yet, but I know this. Kyle is going to be the chair of the Next Gen Committee in Mid-Michigan, right?
Yep, starting January of this incoming year.
Coming up, I was recording with Emily for a series that I'm doing there, and we were talking. I was like, Kyle's coming onto the show, so she was super excited.
I'm really excited to be part of that committee too.
So Kyle, you are a national roving leasing consultant, which I'm going to assume by the national means you travel kind of all over the country. So why don't you kind of dig in a little bit and kind of tell us what your job entails?
Yeah, so blanket terms, we oversee the leasing operations over the 22 states that we're in. I primarily focus on our communities that are either kind of struggling with getting us to where we really want to be on the leasing realm, or just simply filling in the gaps, for example, in between when a leasing agent has departed and we're waiting on our new hire to come in, fill in that spot. And then when that new hire comes in, kind of not directly training, but kind of guiding and giving best practice pinpoints up until our actual proper training department can come in and give them the full Monarch treatment.
Yeah. So you focus on these struggling properties and you're traveling the world. Where are some of the places that you've been that, really speak to you?
Let's see. I've really enjoyed some of my time up in Minnesota. It's very similar weather patterns, of course, to what we have here in Michigan, but I really enjoyed kind of how it's got more of a small town feel in a lot of those different areas with, which builds a larger sense of community around the market. Aside from that, we have some of our presence in the Carolinas with Wilmington and Columbia. Gotta love the Carolinas, some of the most gorgeous landscapes that we see, but then also just some of the different people that we interact with and how they come from such different walks of life. And then, of course, the markets in the Carolinas are rather interesting in how they can be significantly different just within an hour or two from each other.
Yeah. And it's so going from Wilmington to Columbia there is a total different vibe, right? Because Wilmington is that coastal, when it happens, kind of, very low key. Whereas Columbia is they're jumping on it when they come to tour because it is a hot market. It's not that laid back. It's more of that hustle and bustle.
Absolutely. And that's really one thing that I noticed, especially in the Columbia market, is because of its centrality to the state, it's just got such a demand for that occupancy. And luckily, they do have the supply to meet that demand. So it's a really interesting market to be in because you can see it go from dead on one end of the market to completely ridiculously off the walls busy on the opposite end.
Yeah, and it's just there's these lulls, right? You could have one or two pieces of traffic on Monday and Tuesday, and then come Thursday, you are bombarded. You are where did all these people come from? And I have some theories, right? Because it is a melting pot. There are a lot of out-of-towners moving to Columbia and all of that. Usually they're coming on the weekends to tour, so that would explain that Thursday. But I just remember being in Columbia and I'm where's the traffic? And then all of a sudden, I would like leave on Friday and then they would do like 15, 20 tours on Saturday and
Mhm.
like back on like Monday to like, all these leases, which is good. And I'm like, man, can we balance this out a little bit?
It's a lot to catch up on.
Yeah. So you're traveling across, you're fixing properties. You're the Olivia Pope of leasing. And so what are some of the common trends that you're seeing as you're going around to these different marketing?
A lot of what I'm seeing is just that we oftentimes have a lot of, and I'm just speaking in general terms of the overall market between my shops and what I see in person physically helping on my assignments. There's typically a lot more traffic for prospective residents versus what the actual resident traffic is that kind of offsets the prospective traffic to be almost backburnered in a sense, not to the point that it's neglected, but there's so much going on in these offices that leasing is still the priority, but where we typically would like to get it done around 10, 11, and just take the day as it comes from there. That's not typically practical everywhere we go. That's really the hardest part too, is trying to find that soft ground between still taking on all of that unstoppable kind of stuff that you can't wiggle yourself out of, but still taking care of the things that kind of cross your desk as they come and go.
Yeah. I mean, and I feel like probably over the last 2 to 3 years, I feel like we've seen a shift, right? So, in the kind of office dynamics, and I think part of that kind of plays into a centralization model or a specialization model, whatever you want to call it, right? But there's also what I'm seeing is a gap in leadership, right? Because we're losing some of our strong leaders in the industry. And now you're getting the new workforce and kind of the entitlement of a manager almost, meaning I saw this in San Diego when I toured last year that the manager refused to tour me. It was below her to tour me, which is heartbreaking in the industry as itself, right? Because at the end of the day, like every single person on a property in an office should know how to tour and they should be willing to take tours, especially like when you're struggling. So like I think like that kind of shifts that. And let's kind of talk about what I call leasing foundations, because I hate the word back to basics, because how far back are we going to go? What does that even mean? So let's kind of talk about some of those like foundation levels, right? Like what are I think I know what I'm seeing, but what are you seeing from that perspective? Where are we missing the gap?
A lot of times what I will do prior to going out on an assignment, especially if it's my first time in the market, is take a look at who all of our competitors are and then just send a simple e-lead into all of our comps. That way I can probe not only the prospect experience that they're providing, but then see if their online presence is actually matching what they actually have in their inventory. What I've noticed is a lot of people are afraid to pick up that phone and just make that first impression and actually establish that rapport between our office and the prospective resident. With my shops, I've noticed I could probably count on two hands how many times I've managed to get a call back from the office and get a tour scheduled from them versus me sending in the e-lead, waiting for the email thread to work its magic, and then eventually get on the schedule for an appointment, where I'll typically go in, send the e-lead, send an email, maybe two, and then go in and schedule myself for an appointment.
Yeah, so it's interesting about the phone because I'm seeing that too. And again, I think it kind of goes back into a generational thing, right? Like these new leasing consultants who are late teens, early 20s that we're hiring on, they've never been a call generation, right? They've always been about the text messaging and they've always been about the email, all of those things. So to pick up the phone and call somebody, it is one of the scariest things that they've probably ever had to do in their whole entire life. I mean, don't get me wrong. I hate calling on the phone. I just am like, my brain just doesn't work like that. So like, I like to text, but like, obviously for work, it means something else. So you are, I know you're not into training and you do that kind of thing, but you're obviously going to have some contact with some new leasing people. So how do you kind of like coach them and on that, like just to pick up the phone?
One of my favorite things to do is, especially when it's a new piece of traffic, I'll kind of work with them to set the expectation that while this isn't necessarily what our SOP states, I personally like to take the extra step to hit them with all available points of contact. So, for example, if your CRM has the ability to text your prospects, I would like to call, text, and email them all in one go. That way, you can either figure out which contact method works best for them and use that going forward, or alternatively, you've hit them with 3 points of contact, so they're going to see something eventually when they're checking their emails, text, or their voicemails. Whether they're interested or not, they'll let us know.
So you've done some shops. Like, have you done phone shops?
That's typically what I'll do about my first or second day into my assignment. I'll send out the little e-lead like Thursday or Friday before I get out to the market that I'm going to. And then I'll start my phone shopping once I'm actually on site so that I can do my in-person shops before I head out at some point. I like to do them all in one day though.
Okay. So let's talk about, what you're hearing on the phone. What is the new phone style of leasing agents that you're experiencing?
A lot of greetings that I'm hearing kind of differ between the almost disengaged kind of picking up just to pick up and get the call over with, over to the overly engaged, super energized, ready to help, however I can help you type of customer service. And there doesn't really seem to be a middle ground, which might work to our disadvantage only because we don't want to be not doing enough or coming off too strong to our prospect pool or even our residents.
Yeah. How often are people actually picking up the phone when you call?
There are more times often than not that I have to call more than once. I'll just say that.
I was shocked that I had like 38 people call me. Like when I shopped 100 properties, only 38 called me, which doesn't sound like a lot, right? Let's be real. But when you look at, I only had like 55 actually do any sort of follow-up with me to begin with. So I was seeing that. I can tell you how many times I'm in an office somewhere and the phone's ringing and no one's picking it up. And they're like, it's kind of like, I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but it's kind of like who's on first. Like no one is like jumping to get that. So I'm glad that you are at least getting some contacts. Do you feel that on the phone side of it, is it more people centric, like you as a prospect, or is it they're just dumping a whole bunch of information to try to get you to hurry up, come book a tour and get you off the phone quickly?
A lot of it tends to lean more into that information overload realm, which it sounds great on paper because we're giving them, all of the info that they need at once. But then alternatively, we're overloading them with information at the same time versus breaking it up into chunks where we could go over and kind of use some of that information as closing tools while they're either physically with us or, for example, out of state, just, online on the phone and trying to fill it out.
So if you had to guess, about how long do you think your average phone call is?
I'd say a healthy guess would be about a 5-minute call.
Okay, which was definitely a little bit longer than I was expecting you to say, because the latest statistic that shows, we have some top performers, meaning the people who are really good, they pick up the phone and they get that phone traffic to convert to a tour. On average, their normal phone call is about 7 minutes and 35 seconds. And then on the flip side, those people who are not so great at converting from the phone traffic to the tour, their phone call is about 3 minutes and 48 seconds. So it seems like you have a healthy medium. Now, if you were truly looking for an apartment when you're doing this phone shop, based off what you hear, would you actually book the appointment?
For the most part, I have been impressed with the customer service side of it. There have been some times where it just kind of turned me off and the call felt more of a transactional experience than anything. But I am seeing more of an upward trend personally, where when that call is established, that relationship is at least attempted to be built on and nurtured further than what I experienced when I first entered the market.
Yeah. Have you had any AI phone calls, like where you call the leasing offices and it's an AI person like on the back end?
I haven't gotten to run into that yet, actually.
Okay. I've worked at some companies that have had it, and it's either one of those things that you either love it or you hate it, because usually they filter in the side first, right? They filter in through they hit two to talk to the office, and then they press one to talk to leasing, and the AI gets, and then the prospect gets super frustrated because they're like, I want to talk to an agent. And then it's like, I don't understand you. Human, please, right? And then you have, so those are the people who hate it. But then you have the ones who are like, I just want the information. I'm good to go. So I was just curious to see if you had experienced that yet. But now you know to be on the lookout for it.
Yep. And that actually sounds like a great way to kind of rebuild that prospect experience when that happens too.
Yeah. So, what are your tips and tricks to kind of make this phone call a little bit better? Like what can we be doing differently in your eyes?
Making sure we're using the prospect's name goes a long, long way. Even if just once or twice, it shows that we're engaged in the conversation and actually trying to maintain that relationship rather than just looking at them as, oh, well, you'll be part of my commission check, and actually making them feel valued as a resident, since this will ultimately be their home versus just a place they come in and out of. And then in addition to that, just really tailoring your follow-up to being or matching rather what the prospect needs, that will best be upheld by your heavy, heavy notes. I always say, you can't be overly descriptive. You can be under descriptive. But the more descriptive you are, the easier it is for someone to pick right back up where you left off.
So let's say we're going to make up an imaginary prospect, right? You just got off the phone with the prospect. What would your notes kind of entail? Just because, I agree. Like, I make notes about every single thing because I have the memory of a fish. But I don't want to ever let that prospect know that, right? So like those details, I want to make sure in there. So give me an example of kind of like what your note would say based off of prospect you spoke with.
Yeah. So when I'm on the call with my prospect, I'll kind of plug in my notes in my CRM as I'm going through the call and kind of like general shortened, compressed things that I can translate into a full note. So by the time that I'm done, I have the prospect's move-in date, pet information, how many people will be living with them, specific preferences on their apartment, if an appointment was secured, if we discuss any specials, price range, essentially filling out a mini guest card of sorts while their full guest card is actually within the CRM. So you don't have to kind of bounce between screens to figure all of that out. And you can just be on your call with them and look just at that one note to have all of that information there.
People make fun of me because of my notes. I'm like, spoke with Kyle. He's looking to move from Michigan to Columbia. He's looking to move around the 15th of January. It'll be him and one other person. Both are relocating for work. Kyle works in multifamily. The roommate works in the hospital. They, will be relocating with their two dogs. Yada, yada, yada. Didn't really know much about the floor plans, but really stated that the closet space was important for all their clothes. So, need to show them X, Y, Z. They would be looking to tour on Friday, a tour booked. Here's what I quoted them. Here's the apartment number. If that one's not available, here's the option one. They might be a little late because their flight gets in at blah, blah, blah. So I essentially I'm a co-pilot or an AI transcriber before that was even cool, right? Because I just want to know. So when you showed up to me on Friday, right, I would have read through those notes and I would have said, Kyle, how was your flight in from Michigan today? It looks like you didn't have any delays, which is a win in the airlines today, right? That breaks the ice right then and there.
And not only that, that is one of the best ways to maintain that rapport and actually elevate that relationship once they're actually on site, especially with me typically not always being there, for example, for the appointments that I schedule. I want our teams to have as much information for them to close on that sale as possible. And what better way to do that than having those little tidbits of information that you wouldn't really have otherwise?
Right. And it makes it even better for your staff that's there, right? That they have that before that person even shows up. And now that person is saying, so when we look at an experience and a customer service thing, like that just sets the bar a little bit higher because you knew something about me that I didn't tell you. I told someone else, so you made those notes. Switch gears here for a second, and I want to talk about another lost art of outreach marketing. I think if you go onto a lot of sites and you tell people, hey, we need to go outreach marketing, they look at you like a deer in headlights. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy.
I really got my passion for outreach marketing when I was in the new development realm. It kind of became one of my favorite things to get my face slammed with a door into it because it's one of the best ways to get your name out there. Even if you're getting a no, there's still somebody finding out about you. There's still the chance of that word to travel mouth to mouth. And even then, that's still an opportunity there. I always like to dedicate 3 to 5 hours a week to outreach marketing to make sure that we're keeping our company's name out there and interesting with at least 2 hours in person to make sure we're maximizing that exposure.
Wow. So when you go out and you're doing these in-persons or you're spending this 3 to 5 hours a week, what are the things that you're doing?
A lot of times, if it's an established relationship, one of my go-tos is little gift baskets that we can do under like $50 just to kind of remind them that we're here, give them any updates on if there are applicable specials, pricing, any changes to preferred employer programs. Also, always provide flyers for that because our partners will, if we're actually set up with them, hold that in like their break rooms, for example. But in the case that I'm trying to establish a relationship, I love to bring, a little bit more of an exorbitant gift basket to kind of get ourselves in the door and then kind of explain to whomever I'm speaking with that this is more of a relationship of sorts rather than me trying to sell you guys something. We want to let you guys know we're here for you all rather than just trying to give us your money, and really just going that extra mile and putting that little pinch of personality on it, finding out a little bit about them and tweaking the items that we bring to, what they like.
I think for me, it's always been, right, like preferred employer programs kind of make me chuckle a little bit in some places because we have these preferred employers, but yet someone forgot to tell the company that they're a preferred employer, like what we intend to do, right? So like, okay, so who are the largest people in the area? Okay, so guess what? You three are now the preferred employers of Property ABC, but we never do anything to the company to tell them that. So we're just kind of like throwing things at a dark, right? Hopefully we get that. And they might be the largest employer in the region, but guess what? They're like 20 minutes away from where our property's at. So that may not be the best. So one of the things that I like to do is I like data. And it's really weird because I am like, most people would describe me as super outgoing and high energy. And that's like my work persona. But I like to go into the data and I like to analyze the data. And so, on a monthly basis, I would review all my move-in files and I would start identifying where do they work. And I would make a list. I had an Excel sheet. I have an Excel sheet for everything in my life, but I had an Excel sheet. Okay. So and it said, I would list in the months and how many people were moving in. But then I took it a step further and I was like, can I determine a pattern of where people are moving from? I've worked in a lot of big markets, right? So Austin, that was a big market and no one's from Austin anymore. So they had to relocate from somewhere, right? So now can I identify, okay, I know where they work. I have that information, but maybe a lot of people are moving from San Diego or they're moving from Silicon Valley. Okay, so now that tells me my outreach marketing is going to look a little bit different because obviously they're not there. So I'm going to need to go to and target social media. I'm going to need to target things in those big cities, but you have to have the data. And so once you go back to find where people work, people if they're happy with you, they will make connections for you. So I would call them Kyle, yeah, I noticed that you're at Monarch these days, hey, I'd love to get in and kind of help your friends to come live with us. Guess what? We have not in most states you can refer a friend bonus, but the Carolinas, not so much. So, so just mindful of that, but right, let your residents do the work.
Yep. I mean, as long as we can kind of establish that baseline relationship, our residents will do the rest of the work. And that's been historically proven at many of the places that I've helped out at.
And I think another thing when it comes to outreach marketing is going to the competitor. I know you have some thoughts on that.
Yes, no. And actually, that was I started working in the industry in November of 19. So I actually got my footing around the pandemic, of course. So in that time, my leasing manager had taught me one of the best ways for us to stay filled up is actually establishing that relationship with your competitors rather than looking at them like, oh, they're competitors. We don't want to talk to them. Because at the end of the day, if they're fully occupied and they know that you need 2-bedroom traffic, why would they not want to send them across the street to you guys? Because at the end of the day, if they move out, they have a very high likelihood of going back across the street to that company 2 years later because of that nurturing to the relationship that they provided.
Yeah, and I think the other point too is that your apartment community isn't for everybody. And I think we have to get out of that mindset that every person that's going to come into the store is going to lease with us. If you don't have what they want, that's okay. But I do know across the street, they do have that large soaking tub that you wanted. So, hey, I know Kyle across the street. Let me just give him a call and let him know you're coming over, right? Bridge that gap, because then that shows like, oh, wow, I'm going to spread the word about you because you provided great customer service. You didn't have what I wanted, but you knew who did. So you sent me there. But then what do you think your competitors are going to do? A, they're not going to talk bad about you. That's a win, right? We see that a lot happening. But B, they're also going to refer people to you. Maybe they're sold out of 1-bedrooms and you're not. So they're going to send them there.
And that's honestly one of the best ways for you to maintain occupancy when your company doesn't necessarily have a large footprint in the market. We have a couple communities in Indiana that they're the only property in that region, but they've maintained the ability to be friendly with their competitors and keep that traffic. So although they're the only one of their company in that region, they still have the relationship built within their competitors to kind of share that traffic around the region. Yeah. When available, of course.
No, and that makes total sense to do that. And I've worked in both extremes. When I worked for a company, I had one property in Williston, North Dakota, and one property in Dickinson, North Dakota, and that's 2 to 3 hours apart. So I couldn't share traffic. But then I've also worked in in regions, when I worked in Austin. The company I worked for, within a mile radius, was 4 properties on the south side, and then you had 6 properties on the north side. We actually essentially owned a whole road in Austin. So we were competing with ourselves as well as, some of the other competitors. So just making sure that you kind of can sell your sister sites, but also sell the competitor to those people who you don't want them to move with you if they're not happy and loving it, because your life's going to be miserable.
And even on the prospect experience end, there has never been an ungrateful prospect for me going that extra mile and saying, hey, well, it looks like you might be able to find something here. It makes the world of difference, and you can even get a 5-star review out of that.
Yeah. Or if they're even on the fence, and you're like, yeah, go. I already know what they have. Here's the price. Sometimes it sways them just enough, oh, you're right, I don't need to go to them. You've already did it all. You helped me, and I know what that's going to be like as well. So as we wrap up here, I wanted to wade into some uncharted territory for some people, a hot topic right now in multifamily. Let's talk about revenue optimization software. So give me your hot takes on that.
So blanket terms, it's a very, very extremely useful tool. Ultimately, it comes down to the consumer of the product and how they are implementing it, where it starts to get frustrating. Because both on the leasing end and the prospect end, when you get up to the daily price changes, it's really difficult for not only the leasing team to keep up with those price changes, but it could even fluctuate between $45 to $50 for one unit between one day to the other. Then that leads the leasing team to explain to the prospect, why this unit for some reason went up $50 this next day when, yeah, we could be using the argument that you should have applied for it yesterday when, we don't take into consideration, for example, maybe the prospect didn't have the funding available for the application until the day following, and now they feel kind of punished for having to wait and getting charged $50 more monthly for the same unit. Where I've found a lot of success with the revenue management softwares that I've worked with previously is rather than taking their daily suggestions, we would have a weekly call with our regional manager, the revenue management company, and my site staff, where we would just go over the leasing numbers for the week, go over their pricing suggestions, and then I would base my suggestions off of kind of like an average of their daily suggestions. Because I don't think a lot of people really realize that while they do have pricing daily updates available, you don't have to take that. So my office found a lot of success in compiling all of the data that the revenue management software was providing us, getting those averages, and then kind of seeing how that played with our traffic through the week so that we still had full reign over the leasing operations and all of the numbers that we had, but we're still just about fully utilizing that management software.
And it's so crazy to me that we're having this conversation here in 2025, because I actually, when I first entered the industry in 2014, we fully rolled out a revenue management software. So we adapted. I actually was a leasing manager at the time. I set the daily rates. I personally love daily rates because if it's done right, I've seen the hold be anywhere from 24 to 72 hours. I'm a happy medium. I think 48 hours is suffice, because you also got to keep in mind too that you do have a lot of the people a lot of states have what I call the buyer's remorse return policy, right? So technically if they cancel within, 72 hours, usually applying, then technically in most states that you have to fully refund things, right? Because they felt pressured and all those things, right? So, but I would say, we changed to daily. I was in a very aggressive leasing manager. I knew how many notices I had. I knew here's what the software said. I actually remember telling my VP of revenue, I will set the prices. And if you think I'm going too aggressive, please tell me that you think I'm going too aggressive, and I'll tell you why I went that aggressive. So, he got to be kind of hands off a little bit on me, because I knew okay, whoa, way too high, or be let's pull back. And I rarely pulled back because I just knew, but it was such a way to create that urgency for me of hey, your quote is expiring in 24 hours. Guess what? The pricing did go up. And I always explain it in the matter of hey, yeah, there's a $50 swing and here's why, right? We've had several different people interested in that. So the demand went up very much. If you were to go buy a plane ticket, a hotel ticket, and even to the sense of hey, here you go to a Starbucks in the airport. That price is different than if you go to the Starbucks right before you get onto the airport route, right? Because there is a captive audience and they can kind of charge. And that's kind of similar. And I had a lot of success in that.
It can definitely work when it's managed correctly. I think a big flaw of it is there's the disconnect between the corporate office and the site staff and, just the understanding of how it's.
Speaking of a disconnect, this is our last question here. And this is a surprise question to you. So sorry. Do you feel that today's leasing agent has the tools they need to be successful?
This might be a hot take, but I feel we're overloading them with tools to the point that while they do have all the tools for success, which one do we grab to get to that endpoint is where we're currently at, I've started to see.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are seeing that too, right? That we're looking at our tech stack. Only why I ask is because the new leasing agent everything is done on our phone. And a lot of times, there's policies about you can't give out your number to prospects. You do all these things, right? But what I found is, and I used to break the rules, whatever it takes to get this out. And this from experience, when you're out at these struggling properties, you have to do whatever it takes to get the sale. And that if that means your CRM system isn't able to text, and I like to send videos and it wouldn't allow me to send videos because they were too big, and then I couldn't upload them to like a OneDrive because then it would like the system would only allow people internally to be like, it was a whole thing, right? So I would just text people like, hey, here's the video. But then 8-9 o'clock at night, they would text back like, hey, I'm trying to fill out the application. Here's where I'm like stuck at. And so like, I feel like the tools that we have in place are usually focused on a corporate leader, like make their lives easier, or the community manager. And it's never about the end user. Who is going to be using the Leasing agent? And I think that's what we got to figure out.
There have been so many times over the last 5 years where I would, for example, run into a prospect saying, well, I just uploaded pay stubs to my application, but now I'm getting another email asking me for pay stubs. I just emailed that. And then we have to go back and explain, well, that's separate. That's for this and that part of the application, but that's not part of your actual application submission. So again, we have a lot of tools available, but it's to the point now where we got to pinpoint which ones are the best and which ones get us those results we're looking for the quickest, so we're not overwhelming ourselves with everything.
Yes, I agree. Well, Kyle, this has been a lovely conversation. If people want to reach out to you, connect with you, pick your brain some more, where would they find you?
LinkedIn is probably the best option for that, or my email is just my first initial and last name at monarchinvestment.com.
We will make sure that your LinkedIn is tagged when we post this. Any final thoughts?
I think that just about wraps it up, other than leaving you guys with my mantra being hashtag GTFL, standing for Get That Freaking Lease.
I love that. Well, thanks everyone for listening. You've been listening to Rooms with Ronald, a podcast brought to you by the MMM Network. I've been joined today by Kyle Hillebrand, who is the National Roving Leasing Consultant for Monarch Investment and Management Group. And until next time, guys, happy leasing. Bye.